The injured homeless man lying on the gurney in the corner of the ER had been waiting for 3 hours, and not a single doctor had bothered to check on him. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, and his arm hung at an unnatural angle. To everyone rushing past, he was invisible, just another transient who'd probably stumbled drunk into traffic. But the way he controlled his breathing, the way his eyes tracked every movement in the room, that wasn't the behavior of someone out of control. That was training. And in about 20 minutes, one phone call would make every person in that hospital wish they'd paid attention. The night shift at County General was brutal. Overflowing beds, screaming patients, and a skeleton crew stretched beyond their limits. Nurses moved like machines, triaging based on who screamed loudest or bled fastest. The man in the corner did neither. He simply lay there, eyes half closed, jaw set. A resident passed him twice without stopping. A nurse glanced at his chart, saw no insurance information, and moved on to the next bed. In a system built on prioritization, he'd already been categorized. Low priority, no emergency, no urgency. But there was something off about him that a few people noticed, even if they didn't stop to process it. The way he positioned himself on the gurney. Not sprawled out like most intoxicated patients, but controlled, one leg slightly bent, weight distributed evenly. When a crash cart rolled past, his eyes snapped to it with focus, not confusion. And when an orderly roughly adjusted his foreline without warning, he didn't flinch. He simply looked at the orderly with an expression so steady, so measured, it made the younger man uncomfortable enough to walk away quickly. Dr. Marcus Chen was the attending that night, a man who prided himself on efficiency and decisiveness. He ran his ER like a military operation. Ironic, given what was about to happen. When he finally noticed a man in the corner, it was only because a nurse mentioned they needed the bed for incoming trauma. Chen glanced at the chart. No name, no history, no insurance. He sighed with visible irritation. These cases always took forever, buried in paperwork and social services. He approached the gurney with the energy of someone performing an obligatory task. "All right, let's make this quick," Chen said, not to the patient but to the nurse beside him. Probable intoxication, maybe a broken arm. Get him splinted, give him a referral to the free clinic, and discharge him. We need this bed. The man's eyes opened fully then, not with anger, not with pleading. With assessment, Chen didn't notice. He was already moving on, barking orders about the incoming car accident victims. The nurse hesitated, something nagging at her about the patient's vitals. His heart rate was too controlled, his pain response too managed. But Chen was already gone, and she had 6 other critical patients. She made a note to return when she could. That's when the situation began to shift, though no one realized it yet. A woman in business attire entered the ER, moving with purpose that cut through the chaos. She wasn't a patient. She wasn't family of a patient. She walked directly to the administrative desk and said something that made the clerk's face go pale. The clerk picked up the phone. Then another phone. Within 90 seconds, the hospital administrator was speed-walking through the ER doors, and 2 security guards had positioned themselves near the entrance. Not to keep people out, to keep people in. Dr. Chen was in the middle of treating a laceration when his pager went off. Then his phone. Then a hospital security officer appeared at his elbow, politely but firmly asking him to step into the hall. Chen's irritation spiked into anger. He was in the middle of a shift, drowning in patience, and now administration wanted to chat? He snapped off his gloves and followed, ready to unleash about budget cuts and staffing. But the administrator's face stopped him cold. The man looked terrified, and standing next to him was a woman in a business suit, holding a phone to her ear, her expression carved from ice. "Dr. Chen," the administrator said, his voice thin, "the patient in bed 17, the one you were about to discharge." Chen's mind blanked for a second. Bed 17. The homeless man. What about him? The woman ended her call and turned to face Chen fully. "That patient is Lieutenant General James Madigan, United States Army. He's been undercover as part of a federal investigation into hospital treatment disparities. And you just tried to discharge a man with 3 broken ribs, a fractured radius, and internal bleeding without so much as a proper examination. The hallway tilted. Chen's brain struggled to process the words. General, undercover, investigation. He looked through the window into the ER, at the man still lying on the gurney, and suddenly every detail snapped into focus with horrifying clarity. The controlled breathing, managing pain without morphine, the alert eyes, situational awareness, the perfect stillness, discipline under duress. This wasn't a drunk transient. This was a man who'd spent 40 years in command of soldiers, testing a system from the inside, and Chen had just failed spectacularly. That's impossible, Chen stammered, but his voice had no conviction. The administrator's hand was shaking as he held up his own phone, showing a message from the hospital's board of directors. The woman, who introduced herself as a federal investigator, explained with surgical precision. The general had volunteered for this operation after multiple reports of patient neglect based on appearance and insurance status. He'd walked into 4 hospitals over 3 months. County General was the last, and they performed exactly as predicted. Worse, actually, because Chen hadn't just delayed treatment. He'd actively tried to remove the patient from care. Back in the ER, the general was finally being attended to by 3 nurses and a senior physician who'd been urgently summoned. His actual injuries were severe. The broken arm was the least of it. His breathing was shallow because of the rib fractures. His blood pressure was dropping because of internal bleeding they'd missed entirely. If he'd been discharged as Chen ordered, he likely would have collapsed within an hour, possibly fatally. And every bit of it was documented. Body camera, audio recording, witness statements. The investigation wasn't just about policy. It was building a case. Chen felt his career disintegrating in real time. The other staff members were beginning to realize something catastrophic had happened. Whispers spread through the ER. The nurse who'd almost followed his discharge order looked like she might be sick. The orderly who'd been rough with the 4 had disappeared into a supply room. And Dr. Marcus Chen, who prided himself on running an efficient, no-nonsense emergency department, stood frozen as he watched a team of actual professionals treat the patient he'd written off. The general, even in pain, even with broken bones, watched it all with that same measured expression, taking notes, drawing conclusions. The investigator wasn't done. She informed Chen that his treatment decisions for the past 6 months were now under review. Every discharge, every delay, every patient he'd categorized as low priority based on appearance, insurance status, or perceived social value. The hospital's legal team was already in emergency session. The board was drafting statements, and Chen's name was about to become a case study in exactly what not to do, not because he was uniquely cruel, but because he was exactly average. And that was the point. The system didn't need monsters to fail its most vulnerable patients. It just needed people who stopped seeing them as people. Lieutenant General Madigan was transferred to a private room for surgery within the hour. His actual identity was confirmed through military channels, sending shock waves through the hospital's chain of command. The staff who'd ignored him weren't fired immediately. That would come later through proper channels. But they were removed from active duty pending investigation. The nurses who'd sensed something was wrong, but didn't act, felt the weight of their silence. And Dr. Chen sat in an empty office, staring at his hands, realizing that his efficiency metrics and his pride in tough decisions had just destroyed everything he'd built, because he'd forgotten the first rule of medicine. Every patient deserves to be seen. The story broke in the media within 48 hours, not because the military wanted publicity, but because the findings were too important to bury. Hospital administrators across the country suddenly found themselves reevaluating their triage protocols. Training programs were revised, and somewhere in a recovery room, a general with 40 years of service and 3 Purple Hearts watched the news coverage with quiet satisfaction. He'd taken the mission knowing it might cost him. Broken bones, sure, but also dignity, safety, and basic human care. He'd experienced firsthand what thousands of vulnerable patients experienced every day. And now, finally, people were paying attention. If this story made you feel something, anger at the system, respect for general, or just the satisfaction of seeing arrogance meet accountability, hit that like button, drop a comment telling me which hospital scene hit you hardest. Because these stories aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that the people we overlook, the ones we assume have nothing to offer, might be the ones testing whether we're worthy of our own authority. Subscribe if you want more stories where quiet competence destroys loud arrogance. Because there are a lot more where this came from. And trust me, the next one hits even harder.